Sometimes the cruelest wounds come from those who should love us most. Imagine carrying a child while your own mother trades you away like livestock. In a small frontier town, a pregnant woman faces mockery from her neighbors and betrayal from her family. Her mother exchanges her to a mountain man for a single cow. Everyone believes her life is over. But the mountain man sees something different. He recognizes strength beneath the shame and dignity beneath the scorn. He takes her to his cabin in the wild mountains and gives her what no one else would: respect and protection. What happens when the woman everyone threw away discovers her true worth? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Town of Redemption. Creek sat in a valley where the dust never quite settled. It clung to everything: the false-fronted buildings, the wooden sidewalks, the faces of people who'd learned to keep their eyes down and their judgments sharp. In the summer of 1878, the heat baked the main street into something hard as clay. And mercy was even harder to find. Clara Henley knew this better than most. She walked that street every morning with her hand pressed against the small of her back. 8 months heavy with child, feeling the weight of more than just the baby. She felt the weight of every stare, every whispered word that stopped when she came near, every conversation that resumed the moment she passed. The general store stood at the corner of Main and Prescott, its windows dusty, but its shelves still reasonably stocked. Clara needed flour. Her mother's boarding house was down to scraps, and even scraps had to be stretched when you were feeding 4 guests who paid late and complained early. She pushed open the door. The bell above jangled, bright and cheerful, a sound that didn't match the silence that fell over the 3 women examining bolts of fabric near the counter. "Morning," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. The women nodded, barely. Their eyes slid over Clara's swollen belly, then away, as if the sight of it might be catching. One of them, Martha Hendricks, pulled her daughter closer. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, but she'd already learned to look at Clara with that particular mixture of curiosity and disgust. Mr. Patterson, the store owner, stood behind the counter. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He'd been kind to Clara once, back when her belly was flat and her reputation intact. "Miss Henley," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Just acknowledgement. Just the bare minimum that civility required. "I need flour," Clara said. "£5, if you have it." I had it. He didn't move to get it. Clara waited. The women near the fabric pretended to be absorbed in their examination of a bolt of blue calico, but their attention was fixed on the transaction unfolding at the counter. "Can you pay?" Mr. Patterson asked. The question hung in the air. Clara had always paid. Her mother ran a business, meager though it was. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't beggars either. "Yes," Clara said quietly, "I can pay." He nodded and went to fetch the flour. The transaction completed in silence. Clara counted out the coins, her fingers trembling slightly, and Mr. Patterson wrapped the flour in brown paper without meeting her eyes. As she turned to leave, she heard Martha Hendricks whisper to her companion, just loud enough to be heard, "Shameful. Walking around like she's got nothing to be embarrassed about." Clara's hand tightened on the flour package, but she kept walking. She'd learned not to respond. Defending yourself only made people more certain they were right to condemn you. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. It had been her father's pride once, back when he was alive and things were different. Now it was just a reminder of everything that had slipped through their fingers. Her mother, Judith, sat in the parlor mending sheets. She was a handsome woman still, though hardship had carved lines around her mouth and turned her eyes cold. She'd been widowed 3 years now, and the bitterness of it had settled into her bones like winter damp. "Did you get the flour?" Judith asked without looking up. "Yes, ma'am." Did Patterson give you trouble? No more than usual. Judith's needle paused, meaning he questioned whether you could pay. Clara set the package on the side table. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Judith set down her mending and looked at her daughter properly. You think I don't know what they say about you? About us? This house is barely surviving, Clara. And having you here, looking like that, doesn't help our reputation. Clara had heard this before. The words had lost their power to wound through repetition, but they still left bruises. I help where I can. You're a burden. Judith said it plainly, without particular cruelty, just stating a fact as she saw it. The baby will make it worse. Another mouth to feed. Another reason for decent folks to take their business elsewhere. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, reminding her that none of this was the child's fault. I'll manage, Clara said. How? You think that worthless man who left you is coming back? You think anyone in this town will marry you now? Judith stood, gathering her mending. You need to face facts, girl. We're in a hard spot, and it's about to get harder. Clara watched her mother leave the room. There had been a time when Judith Henley had been softer. When Clara was small, her mother had sung to her, had braided her hair with gentle fingers, had told her stories about happier times. But her father's death had changed everything. The man who'd left Clara pregnant had been the final blow to whatever remained of her mother's capacity for tenderness. His name had been Thomas Wright, and he'd come through town selling patent medicines and promises. Clara had been foolish enough to believe both. He'd been handsome and smooth-talking, with a way of making her feel like she mattered, like she was special. She'd given him everything, and he'd given her a child and a ruined reputation before. Disappearing like morning mist thought, the shame of it had been crushing at first. Clara had cried for weeks, had barely been able to leave her room. But shame was a weight you either learned to carry or let crush you. Clara had chosen to carry it. She climbed the stairs to her small room on the second floor. Through the window, she could see Main Street, could watch people going about their business. Normal people with normal lives. People who made normal mistakes that could be forgiven. Her mistake couldn't be forgiven because it was visible. It grew larger every day, announcing itself to the world. Asterisk. But when the baby kicked, Clara felt something besides shame. She felt protective. Fierce. This child hadn't asked to be born into disgrace. This child deserved better than to be raised in a house where it was seen as a burden. Clara didn't know how to make things better. She only knew that she had to try. Down on Main Street, a figure caught her attention. A man on horseback riding in from the mountain trail. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low, his shoulders broad beneath a worn canvas coat. Even from a distance, there was something about him that made people step aside. Silas McKenna, the mountain man. He came to town 4 times a year, like clockwork. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. He sold furs and bought supplies, and spoke to no one more than necessary. There were stories about him. There were always stories about men who lived alone in the wilderness, but no one knew which stories were true. Clara watched him dismount in front of the trading post. He moved with the economy of someone who wasted neither motion nor words. The trading post owner, Mr. Calhoun, came out to greet him, and even from her window, Clara could see the respect in the man's posture. Silas McKenna commanded respect without asking for it. It was something about the way he carried himself, the way he looked at people directly and spoke plain truth. In a town built on gossip and judgment, he was something different. Clara had never spoken to him. Women like her didn't speak to men like him. But she'd watched him over the years, had noticed things. The way he always paid fairly. The way he never cheated or lied. The way he treated everyone the same, whether they were the mayor or the man who cleaned the stables. She turned away from the window. What did it matter? Men like Silas McKenna lived by their own rules in their own world. Women like Clara just tried to survive in whatever world would have them. And right now, That world was getting smaller every day. Downstairs, she heard her mother moving in the kitchen, heard the familiar sounds of a hard woman making a hard life barely work, heard the future closing in like walls moving closer together. Clara pressed her hand to her belly and felt the baby kick again. "We'll be all right," she whispered, though she had no idea if it was true. Somehow, we'll be all right. But in Redemption Creek, hope was as scarce as mercy, and both were running out. Judith waited 3 days after seeing Silas McKenna ride into town before she made her decision. 3 days of watching Clara move slowly through the boarding house. 3 days of calculating what little money they had against what they'd need when the baby came. 3 days of watching their last 2 boarders pack up and leave because they didn't want to stay in a house with an unwed mother. On the 4th day, Judith walked to the trading post. Silas was examining a new rifle when she entered. The trading post smelled of leather and oil, tobacco and sawdust. Mr. Calhoun stood behind the counter, but Judith's attention was fixed on the mountain man. "Mr. McKenna," she said. He looked up. His eyes were the color of weathered wood, and they assessed her with the same careful attention he'd been giving the rifle. "Mrs. Henley," he said, his voice low and measured, "I have a proposition for you." Calhoun glanced between them, sensing something. "I'll be in the back if you need me, Silas." When they were alone, Judith came closer. She'd removed her wedding ring that morning, slipped it into her pocket. It felt like freedom and failure all at once. "You're a man who lives alone," she said. "I imagine that gets difficult. Cooking, cleaning, mending, all the things a woman does." Silas set down the rifle. "I manage. I'm sure you do. But managing isn't the same as living comfortably." Judith folded her hands, the gesture practiced. "I have a daughter. She's strong, capable, knows how to work. She could make your life easier. Your daughter." Silas's expression didn't change. The pregnant one. So he'd noticed. Of course he had. Everyone noticed. "Yes," Judith said, lifting her chin. "The baby will come soon. You'd have help with the house and land. A woman to cook and clean. And when the child is old enough, another pair of hands. You're offering to sell me your daughter." Judith flinched at the bluntness, but held her ground. "I'm offering a practical arrangement. She can't stay here. The town won't have her, and I can't afford another mouth to feed. You need help, and she needs a place to go. It benefits everyone." Silas studied her for a long moment. His face gave nothing away, but something in his eyes made Judith want to look away. She didn't. "What do you want for her?" he asked finally. "A cow. A good milk cow. The boarding house needs milk, and I need a way to keep it running. A cow for a woman and a baby. A practical trade," Judith said again, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Make it right." Silas walked to the window and looked out at the street. Judith waited, her heart beating harder than she wanted to admit. This was necessary. This was survival. She couldn't let sentiment cloud her judgment. Her husband had been sentimental, and look where that had gotten them. "Does your daughter know about this arrangement?" Silas asked without turning around. "She'll know when it's settled. That's not what I asked. She'll understand the necessity of it." Silas turned back to face her. "Will she?" It wasn't a question, but Judith answered anyway. "She doesn't have a choice. Neither of us do." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a wagon rattled past. Someone called a greeting to someone else. Normal life continuing while Judith negotiated away her daughter's future for the price of a cow. "I'll do it," Silas said finally. "But I want it understood she'd be under my protection. That means she's treated with respect, fed properly, safe. The baby too when it comes." "Of course," Judith said quickly. "I wouldn't send her anywhere she'd be mistreated." The look Silas gave her suggested he knew exactly what kind of treatment Clara had been receiving under her mother's roof. But he didn't voice it. Instead, he said, I'll bring the cow tomorrow. Have her ready." Judith nodded, relief and something heavier settling in her chest. Tomorrow, then? She left the trading post and walked back to the boarding house with her head high. People would talk. Let them. She'd made the hard choice, the necessary choice. Clara would understand eventually. And if she didn't, well, understanding wasn't required for survival. Clara was hanging laundry when Judith found her. The clothesline stretched across the backyard, and Clara moved slowly, pinning sheets with careful attention. Her dress pulled tight across her belly, and Judith felt a flash of something that might have been regret. She pushed it away. "Clara, come inside. We need to talk." Clara looked up, and something in her mother's face must have warned her. Her hand stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "What's happened?" "Inside," Judith repeated. They sat in the parlor, the same room where Judith had mended sheets and made her calculations. Clara lowered herself carefully into a chair, her hand supporting her back. She was 8 months along. The baby would come any day now. "I've made arrangements for you," Judith began. "What kind of arrangements?" "Arrangements that will solve both our problems. You need a place to go, somewhere away from the gossip and the judgment. And I need—" She paused. "I need the boarding house to survive." Clara's face had gone very still. "What did you do?" "I found you a position. With Silas McKenna, the mountain man. You'll go to his cabin, help with the housework, the cooking. He'll provide for you and the baby. You sold me." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I made a practical arrangement." "For what? What was I worth to you?" Judith met her daughter's eyes. "A cow. He's bringing a milk cow tomorrow. It'll help keep the boarding house running." The color drained from Clara's face. She pressed both hands to her belly, as if protecting the baby from the words she was hearing. "A cow. You traded me for a cow. Don't be dramatic. It's a good arrangement. Better than you get anywhere else. No man in this town will have you, Clara. You know that. McKenna is willing to take you in, give you and the baby a home. You should be grateful. Grateful." Clara stood slowly, her movements careful, despite the trembling Judith could see in her hands. "You're my mother, which is why I'm doing what's necessary. You think I want this? You think I want to send you away?" Judith stood as well, her voice rising. "You made your choices, Clara. You lay with a man who wasn't your husband. You got yourself pregnant and ruined your reputation and mine along with it. I'm cleaning up your mess the only way I can. My mess." Clara's voice broke. "I was foolish. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, but I'm still your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything? It means I'm giving you a chance to survive. That's more than most would do." Clara backed toward the stairs, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. "When? Tomorrow. You'll come tomorrow morning with the cow. And if I refuse—" Judith had prepared for this. "Then you'll leave anyway, with nothing. I can't keep you here, Clara. I can't afford it, and I won't watch this house fail because of your shame. At least this way, you'll have shelter and food." Clara's hand gripped the banister. For a moment, Judith thought she might argue further, might rage or cry or beg. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "I need the pack," Clara said. "Backlight. He won't want a lot of fuss." Clara climbed the stairs without another word. Judith listened to her daughter's footsteps overhead, heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. She sat back down in her chair and pulled her wedding ring from her pocket. The gold was tarnished, the band worn thin from years of wear. She'd taken it off to make this deal, and now she wondered if she'd ever put it back on. Her husband would have been ashamed of what she'd done. He'd loved Clara, had doted on her, had believed in second chances and redemption. But her husband was dead, and dead men didn't have to make hard choices. Judith slipped the ring back on her finger. It felt heavier than before. Upstairs, Clara stood in her small room and looked at the few possessions she owned. A worn leather saddlebag lay open on the bed. It had been her father's once. She packed carefully. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's old shawl, the small Bible her grandmother had given her. She left out the little things Thomas had given her. The cheap bracelet, the pressed flower, the promises written on paper. Those went into the stove downstairs, burned to ash while Judith pretended not to notice. Asterisk. That night, Clara lay in bed and felt the baby move inside her. Strong kicks, insistent life. She pressed her hand against the movement and made a silent promise. Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe. I'll protect you. You're worth more than a cow. You're worth everything. In the morning, Silas McKenna would come. Her mother would trade her away like livestock, and Clara would go with him because she had no other choice. But something in her that had been broken for months, something that had cracked when Thomas left and shattered under the weight of the town's judgment, finally broke completely. And in that breaking, something else began to form. Something harder. Something that refused to believe this was the end of her story. She fell asleep with her hand still pressed against her belly, and dreamed of mountains she'd never seen. Silas arrived at dawn with a red heifer named Bessie tied to a lead rope. The cow was healthy, well-fed, worth more than most would pay for human help. He tied her to the boarding house fence and knocked on the door. Judith answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Behind her, Clara stood with the leather saddlebag in her hands. She'd worn her best dress, though best was a relative term. It was clean and mended, and it was all she had. "Mr. McKenna," Judith said. "Right on time." Silas didn't respond. His eyes moved past Judith to Clara. She stood very straight, despite her swollen belly, her chin lifted in a way that spoke of pride even in disgrace. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Whatever tears she'd shed them in private. "Miss Hemley," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. McKenna. You ready?" Clara glanced at her mother one last time. Judith's face was set, her expression revealing nothing. No regret, no sorrow, no second thoughts. Just the cold practicality that had driven her to this transaction. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm ready." She walked past her mother without another word. Judith didn't reach out to touch her, didn't offer any farewell. She simply watched as Clara approached the mountain man and the cow that was her replacement. Silas took the saddlebag from Clara's hands. "This everything?" "Everything that matters." He secured the bag to his saddle, then untied the cow's lead and handed it to Judith. The exchange was complete. A daughter for a cow, a life for livestock. "Treat her well," Judith said, though whether she meant Clara or Bessie was unclear. Silas didn't dignify that with a response. He turned to Clara. "It's a long ride. You'll need to tell me if you need to stop. I'll manage." "I'm sure you will. But tell me anyway." He helped her up onto his horse, his hands respectful, his touch brief. Clara settled into the saddle, and Silas swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, but he kept a careful distance, his body not pressing against hers. They rode away from Redemption Creek as the sun climbed over the eastern ridge. Clara didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, watching the trail that led up into the mountains, toward a future she couldn't imagine and a life with a stranger she didn't know. Behind them, Judith led Bessie to the small barn behind the boarding house. The cow would give milk. The milk would help her keep the boarding house running. It was practical. It was necessary. It was done. The trail climbed steadily, leaving the valley floor behind. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and the smell of dust and dried grass gave way to pine and mountain earth. Clara had never been this far from town. Her whole life had been lived in that valley, in that house, in that narrow world where everyone knew everyone else's business. Silas rode in silence. Clara appreciated that. She didn't want conversation, didn't want false comfort or awkward attempts at kindness. She wanted to feel nothing, to become as empty as the leather bag that now held all her worldly possessions. But the baby wouldn't let her feel nothing. Every movement reminded her that she was responsible for more than just herself. Every kick was a claim, a demand, a promise she had to keep Dot an hour into the ride. Clara shifted uncomfortably. The saddle was hard, and her back ached from the unfamiliar position. She said nothing, but Silas must have noticed. "There's a stream up ahead," he said. "We'll stop there." "I don't need to stop. Horse does." They stopped at the stream. Silas dismounted first, then helped Clara down with the same careful respect he'd shown before. He led the horse to drink while Clara walked slowly to the water's edge. She knelt awkwardly, her belly making the movement difficult, and cupped water in her hands. It was cold and clean, tasting of stone and snow. Nothing like the flat, warm water from the boarding house well. "There's jerky in the saddlebag if you're hungry," Silas said. Clara wasn't hungry, but she knew she should eat. The baby needed nourishment even if she didn't want food. She found the jerky and ate slowly, watching Silas tend to the horse with practiced efficiency. He was older than she'd thought when seeing him from a distance. Maybe 40, maybe more. His hands were scarred and weathered, his face lined by sun and wind. But he moved with a sureness that spoke of strength still present, of capability undiminished by years. "How much farther?" Clara asked. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4, given the pace we need to keep." Given her condition, he meant. Given that she was 8 months pregnant and riding on horseback through mountain terrain. Clara appreciated that he didn't say it outright. "I'll manage," she said again. "You keep saying that, because it's true." Silas looked at her directly for the first time since they'd left town. "Managing isn't the same as being all right. I know that." Clara stood slowly, using a nearby tree for support. "But all right isn't something I can afford to think about. Managing is what I've got." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not pity. Clara had seen enough pity to recognize it, but something closer to understanding. He nodded and helped her back onto the horse. They rode on. The terrain grew steeper, the trail narrower. Pine trees crowded close, their branches filtering the sunlight into shifting patterns. Clara had never seen such wilderness. Redemption Creek had trees, but they were scattered and sparse, beaten down by wind and drought. These trees were thick and tall, ancient and unforgiving. She was beginning to understand why Silas lived up here. There was a cleanness to this place, an honesty. The mountain didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. It didn't smile while it judged you. It simply existed, indifferent to human drama and human shame. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Clara saw the cabin Dot had sat in a small clearing, backed against the mountain itself. Built from logs and river stone, it looked like it had grown there rather than being constructed. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a covered porch stretched across the front. Behind the cabin, she could see a barn and a shed. Both well-maintained. Dot, it was remote, isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor, days from the nearest town. Clara realized that no one would hear her if she screamed. No one would know if something terrible happened to her here. She traded one kind of danger for another. Silas must have felt her tense because he said, "You'll have your own room, door with a latch on the inside. I won't bother you." Clara didn't know if she believed him, but she nodded. Dot. He helped her down in front of the cabin, then tied the horse to the porch rail. The leather saddlebag came down, and he handed it to her. "I'll show you inside." The cabin was simple but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A kitchen area with a proper stove. 2 doors led off the main room. Silas opened one. This was, he paused. "This is the bedroom. Bed's good. Mattress is stuffed with fresh pine needles. Changed them last month." Clara stepped inside. The room was small but adequate. A bed, a chest of drawers, a small table with a wash basin. A window looked out over the clearing. The bed was covered with a faded quilt, but it looked clean and well made. "Where do you sleep?" Clara asked. Silas nodded toward the other door. "That room. You'll have privacy." He showed her where the well was, where he kept the food stores, how the stove worked. He explained his routine in simple terms. He woke at dawn, tended the animals, did whatever work the day required. He was often gone for hours, checking traps or hunting. She was welcome to explore the clearing, but shouldn't wander beyond the tree line until she knew the area better. "There's a latch on your door," he said again. "Use it if it makes you feel safer. Why are you doing this?" Clara asked suddenly, "Why did you agree to my mother's arrangement?" Silas was quiet for a moment. "I had reasons." "What reasons?" "Ones that are mine." He picked up an axe from beside the door. "I'll be splitting wood. You should rest. It's been a long day." He left her there in the cabin, alone with her leather saddlebag and her questions, and the baby moving inside her. Clara unpacked slowly. 2 dresses hung in the small wardrobe. Her undergarments went in the chest of drawers. The Bible went on the bedside table. When everything was put away, the room still looked empty. But it was hers. She lay down on the bed, testing it. The mattress was firm, but not uncomfortable. Through the window, she could hear the rhythmic sound of the axe striking wood. Silas McKenna keeping his word, giving her space, maintaining that careful distance. Clara pressed her hand to her belly and felt the baby kick. She'd been traded for a cow. She'd been brought to a mountain cabin by a strange man. She was alone and pregnant and more frightened than she wanted to admit. But she had a bed. She had a door with a latch. And the man outside splitting wood had looked at her like she was a person. Not a problem. It was more than she'd had in Redemption Creek. For now, it would have to be enough. The first days passed in careful silence. Clara woke to the sound of Silas already moving about, tending to morning chores. She'd emerge from her room to find coffee made and bread set out, sometimes with honey or jam. He'd nod. She'd nod back, and they'd move around each other like dancers, learning an unfamiliar pattern. Silas showed her the routines of mountain, living with patience she hadn't expected. Where the spring was that fed into the well, how to tell when the water needed boiling, which herbs growing wild near the cabin were good for tea and which were poison. He taught her without condescension, explaining things once and trusting her to remember. Clara found herself capable of more than she'd thought. Pregnancy had slowed her, but it hadn't made her helpless. She could carry water, tend the small garden behind the cabin, prepare simple meals. Silas accepted her help without commentary, neither praising nor criticizing. It was different from the boarding house, where every task came with her mother's judgment attached. On the 4th day, Clara was organizing the shelves when she found it a faded daguerreotype in a simple wooden frame, tucked behind a row of canned goods. The image showed a woman and a small girl, both dressed in their Sunday best. The woman had kind eyes and a gentle smile. The girl, no more than 3 or 4, looked like she was trying very hard to sit still for the photograph. Clara heard Silas enter behind her. She turned, still holding the frame. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I was just trying to make some order here, and I found it's all right." Silas's voice was quiet. He came closer but didn't take the frame from her hands. "That was my wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Emma, was... They died 5 years ago. Fever swept through. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back, it was too late." He paused. "Emma went first. Sarah 3 days later." Clara looked down at the image, seeing it differently now. The woman's smile took on a different quality when you knew she was gone. The child's serious expression became heartbreaking. "I'm so sorry," Clara said, and meant it. Silas took the frame gently from her hands and looked at it for a long moment. Sarah would have liked having another woman here. She always said this cabin needed life in it, noise, purpose beyond just surviving. He set the frame back on the shelf, but this time in a place where it could be seen. She wouldn't have wanted them hidden away. "Is that why you agreed?" Clara asked. "To my mother's arrangement? Because you missed having someone here?" "Partly." Silas moved to the window, looking out at the clearing. "Also because I saw what your mother was doing. Saw what that town was doing to you. I remember what it's like when people decide you're not worth their respect." He turned back to face her. "After Sarah and Emma died, people looked at me different. Like I was cursed. Like death might be catching. Got tired of it, so I came up here permanent. But you go back. For supplies." "For supplies," he agreed. "Not for company." Clara understood then. He hadn't taken her in out of pity or for convenience. He'd taken her in because he knew what it was like to be judged unfairly, to be pushed to the margins, to have your worth determined by circumstances beyond your control. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me as a person. Not as," she gestured at her belly, "not as just a problem to be solved." Silas's expression softened slightly. "You're more than your circumstances, Miss Henley. Took me a while to learn that about myself. Figure you're learning it now." After that conversation, something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but the beginning of ease. They talked more during meals. Silas told her about the mountain, which trails were safe, where the deer came to drink, how to read the weather and the way the wind moved through the pines. Clara told him about her father, about the boarding house when it had been a happier place, about small dreams she'd once had. She didn't talk about Thomas. That wound was still too fresh, and besides, Silas never asked. He seemed to understand that some things needed to be left alone until they healed. One evening, Clara was preparing supper when she felt the baby kick particularly hard. She gasped and pressed her hand to her side. Silas looked up from the wood he was carving. "You all right?" "Fine. The baby just..." She winced. "Has strong feet. May I?" He set down his carving and stood up. Clara nodded, uncertain what he meant. Silas came closer and held out his hand, palm up, waiting for permission. When she nodded again, he placed his hand gently on her belly where she'd been pressing her own. They stood like that for a moment, and then the baby kicked again. Silas's eyes widened slightly. "That's something," he said quietly. "Strong baby you've got there." "Too strong sometimes," Clara said, but she was smiling. Silas pulled his hand back, that careful respect returning. "Sarah used to say Emma kicked like she was trying to knock down walls from the inside. Said it meant she'd be a fighter. Was she?" "Fiercest 3-year-old you ever met." His voice carried pride and pain in equal measure. Right up to the end. Clara understood then that he wasn't trying to replace his lost family. He was honoring their memory by helping someone else survive, by being the person he wished had been there for Sarah and Emma when they needed it most. That night, lying in her bed with the door unlatched, she'd stopped using the latch on the third day. Clara thought about the daguerreotype now displayed openly on the shelf, about the woman and child who'd once filled this cabin with life, about the man who'd lost everything and somehow found room in his heart to help a stranger. The mountain night was full of sounds she was still learning to identify. Wind through the pines, night birds calling, the creek running somewhere in the distance. But inside the cabin, she felt safer than she had in months. Not because of walls or locked doors, but because she'd found something she hadn't expected to find. A person who understood what it meant to survive loss and keep moving forward anyway. The baby kicked again, and Clara pressed her hand where Silas's had been earlier. "We'll be all right," she whispered. "I think we actually might be all right." This time, she almost believed it. Summer faded toward autumn. The leaves on the aspens turned gold, and the morning air carried a sharpness that promised winter wasn't far behind. Clara's belly grew larger, and she moved more carefully now, but she felt stronger than she had in town. The mountain air, the simple food, The absence of constant judgment, all of it had restored. Something in her she'd thought was permanently broken. One evening, as they finished supper, Clara noticed Silas pulling out tools and a large piece of pine wood. He sat up near the fireplace where the light was good and began measuring and marking with careful precision. "What are you making?" Clara asked. "Cradle," Silas said simply. He didn't look up from his work. "Baby will need somewhere to sleep." Clara's throat tightened. In all her worrying and planning, she'd thought about having the baby, about surviving the birth, about feeding and caring for an infant. But she hadn't thought about the simple necessities. A cradle, a safe place for a child to sleep. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." "Then why?" Silas set down his measuring tools and looked at her. "Because every child deserves to be welcomed into the world proper, with preparation and care. Deserves to know they were expected and wanted." "Wanted," Clara repeated softly. "You want this baby, don't you?" "Yes," she said it fiercely. "More than anything." "Then the baby's wanted. That's what matters." He returned to his work, and Clara watched him measure twice and cut once, watched him test each piece for smoothness, watched him work with the kind of attention that spoke of love even when he didn't say the word. Over the following days, the cradle took shape. Silas worked on it each evening after supper, his hands moving with practiced skill. The wood was smooth pine, carved with simple but elegant curves. He made it sturdy enough to last, but light enough to move easily. Practical and beautiful at the same time, Clara found herself helping where she could, holding pieces while he fitted them together, handing him tools. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when people have learned to exist peacefully in the same space. "My father was a carpenter," Silas said one evening. "Taught me young. Said a man who could work with wood would never go hungry, never lack for purpose." Was he right? About the hunger, yes. About the purpose. Silas ran his hand along the cradle's edge. "That took me longer to figure out. What's your purpose now?" Asterisk. He was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Same as most folks, I suppose. Try to do right. Try to leave things better than I found them. Try to honor the people I loved by living the kind of life they'd be proud of." Clara thought about her own life, about the choices she'd made, and the choices that had been made for her. "Do you think we get second chances? To do better?" "I think every morning we wake up is a second chance," Silas said. "Question is whether we're brave enough to take it." The conversations between them deepened as the weeks passed. Clara learned that Silas had been a soldier once, fought in the war between the states. He'd seen terrible things, done terrible things, come home to a world that didn't know what to do with men who'd survived when so many hadn't. "Sarah saw past all that," he said. "Saw the man I could be instead of the man I'd been forced to become. She gave me a reason to build something instead of just surviving. You loved her very much. Still do." He looked at the daguerreotype on the shelf. "Love doesn't die just because people do. It just changes shape. Becomes memory instead of presence. But it's still there." Clara understood that. She'd loved her father, and his death had changed the nature of that love, but hadn't ended it. She'd loved Thomas too, in her foolish way. And even though that love had curdled into shame and regret, some part of it remained. Love was complicated that way. "The baby's father," Clara said slowly, testing the words. "He told me he loved me. I believed him. Did he love you? I don't know. Maybe he thought he did in the moment. Or maybe it was just something easy to say to get what he wanted." She pressed her hand to her belly. "Doesn't matter now. He's gone, and I'm here, and this baby will never know him." "That might be a blessing," Silas said. "Or a curse, growing up without a father. Growing up without a father who'd abandon you is better than growing up with one who wishes you weren't there." Silas set down his carving knife. That baby will have what it needs: protection, care, a home. That's more than a lot of children get. Will you? Clara hesitated. When the baby comes, will you help? I know it's not your responsibility, but I don't know anything about birthing babies, and I'm frightened. I'll help however I can, Silas promised. And when the time comes, I'll ride down and fetch Mrs. Chun. She's a midwife, Chinese woman who lives on the other side of the ridge. She's good at what she does. She see you through it. You trust her? With my life. With yours too. The cradle was nearly finished now. Silas had sanded it until the wood was smooth as silk, had fitted the pieces together so perfectly there were no gaps, no rough edges. It would rock gently, would keep a baby safe and warm. One afternoon, Clara came back from the garden to find Silas setting the completed cradle near the fireplace. He'd lined it with soft blankets, had positioned it where it would be warm but not too hot, where the baby could be watched over easily. It's beautiful, Clara said. It's functional. It's both. Silas ran his hand along the cradle's edge one more time, checking for any imperfection. When Emma was born, I made her a cradle too. Not as good as this one. I was younger, less patient, but Sarah loved it anyway. She'd sit beside it for hours, just watching Emma sleep. What happened to it? The cradle? Buried it with them. His voice was rough. Couldn't bear to see it empty. Clara walked over and placed her hand on the new cradle, feeling the smooth wood Silas had worked with such care. This baby is lucky to have someone like you watching over them before they're even born. We're all looking after each other, Silas said. That's what people do when they choose to be decent. That night, Clara lay in bed looking at the cradle through her open door. The firelight cast shadows that made it seem to rock gently, as if already inhabited by dreams. She thought about Silas's words, about second chances, about choosing to be decent, about love changing shape but never truly dying. The baby moved inside her, and Clara whispered promises into the darkness. Promises that this child would know safety, would know care, would never be traded away like livestock or judged for circumstances beyond their control. Outside, the mountain winds sang through the pines. Inside, a cradle waited. And between them, Clara began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and her baby had found the one thing she'd stopped believing existed. They'd found a home. The first frost came, early that year, coating the clearing in silver. Clara woke to find her window etched with ice crystals, beautiful and delicate. She wrapped herself in her shawl and emerged from her room to find Silas already stoking the fire. "Winter's coming early," he said. "Need to make sure we're ready." They spent the day preparing. Silas brought in extra firewood and stacked it near the hearth. They checked the food stores, counted blankets, made sure the barn was secure against the coming cold. Clara moved more slowly now, her belly large and low, but she did what she could. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Silas stood and went to the chest where he kept his personal belongings. He returned with something in his hands, a wool blanket, deep blue and beautifully woven. "Sarah made this," he said, holding it out to Clara. "For Emma. She spent a whole winter on it, working by firelight. Emma only got to use it for a few months before." He stopped, started again. "I want your baby to have it." Clara took the blanket with trembling hands. It was soft and warm, woven with the kind of love that survives loss. "Silas, I can't. This is too precious. It's meant to keep a child warm. That's what Sarah made it for. Keeping it folded in a chest doesn't honor her memory. Using it does." Clara pressed the blanket to her face, breathing in the faint scent of cedar from the chest where it had been stored. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Silas sat back down, and for a while they were both quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up, promising the first real storm of the season. "Can I tell you something?" Clara asked. "Something I haven't told anyone?" If you want to. Clara took a breath. When Thomas, the baby's father, when he left, I was angry. Furious. But more than that, I was ashamed. Not because of what we'd done, but because I'd been so blind. So stupid. Everyone always said I was too trusting, too naive. And they were right. Being trusting isn't the same as being stupid, Silas said. It felt the same. Feels the same sometimes. Clara folded the blanket carefully on her lap. The worst part was how everyone in town looked at me after. Like I'd confirmed everything they'd always suspected about me. That I was weak, foolish, deserving of whatever I got. People judge because it makes them feel superior. Makes them feel safe, like bad things won't happen to them because they're smarter, better, more careful. Silas poked at the fire. But life doesn't work that way. Bad things happen to good people all the time. Being judgmental is just a way of pretending we have control we don't actually have. My mother said I'd ruined everything. Her reputation, the boarding house, my own future. Clara's voice was steady now, speaking truths she'd been holding inside for months. She said I was selfish for keeping the baby. That I should have found some woman to take care of it before it was born. And you didn't want to. No, I couldn't. This baby is, she pressed her hand to her belly. This baby is the only thing that's truly mine. The only choice I get to make. I won't give that up. Silas nodded slowly. That's not selfish. That's love. They're not the same thing, no matter what your mother told you. Do you think I'll be a good mother? Without anyone to teach me? Without a husband to help? I think you'll be the mother your child needs. That's all that matters. They talked late into the night. About fear and hope. About loss and survival. About the strange paths that lead people to the places they need to be, even when those places aren't anything like what they imagined. I never thought I'd end up here, Clara said. Living in a cabin on a mountain with a man I barely know. Do you wish you were somewhere else? Clara considered the question honestly. No, and that surprises me. I should hate this place. Should hate the circumstances that brought me here. But I don't. I feel more at peace here than I ever did in that town. Peace is underrated, Silas said. People chase happiness, excitement, passion. But peace is what lets you sleep at night. Peace is what lets you wake up and face another day. Did you find peace here? After Sarah and Emma? Eventually. Took a long time. First year or two, I was just numb, going through motions. Then slowly, the mountain worked its way into me. The quiet. The rhythm of the seasons. The way things grow and die and grow again. It taught me that grief doesn't end, but it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. Clara understood. A grief was different grief for dreams that died, for innocence lost, for a mother's love that had proven conditional. But grief was grief, and it all had to be carried somehow. The storm arrived that night. Clara woke to the sound of wind howling around the cabin and rain drumming on the roof. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning lit her window in brilliant flashes. She lay in bed with Sarah's blanket pulled close and listened to the storm rage. Through her open door, she could see the main room. Silas had fallen asleep in his chair by the fire, his head tilted back, his face peaceful in sleep. He'd stayed up late to keep the fire going, to make sure the cabin stayed warm, to keep watch the way he always did. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been closed and guarded for so long that she'd almost forgotten it existed. It wasn't just gratitude she felt toward this quiet, honorable man. It wasn't just respect or friendship or relief at being safe. It was more than that. She didn't name it. Naming things gave them power, made them real in ways that could hurt. But as she watched Silas sleep and listened to the storm and felt her baby move beneath Sarah's blanket, Clara allowed herself to feel what she felt without judgment or fear. For now, that was enough. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and the air crisp with the promise of snow to come. Clara emerged from her room to find Silas already making breakfast, and they moved around each other with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Neither of them mentioned what had passed between them the night before. Neither needed to. Some understandings ran deeper than words, settling into the quiet spaces where truth lived. 3 weeks later, Clara was hanging laundry in the weak autumn sun when she heard horses approaching. The sound made her freeze. They rarely had visitors this far up the mountain. She looked toward the tree line where the trail emerged and saw 2 riders coming into the clearing. Her heart stopped. One of the riders was the sheriff from Redemption Creek. The other was her mother. Silas appeared from the barn, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept near the door. When he saw who it was, his expression hardened. Judith dismounted with the sheriff's help. She looked thinner than Clara remembered, her face drawn. The sheriff, a man named Garrett, who'd always struck Clara as decent but weak, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. McKenna," Judith said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "I've come for my daughter." "No," Silas said simply. "I'm not asking your permission." Judith reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I have documentation. The arrangement between us was temporary. Clara belongs to me." Clara's legs felt weak. She moved toward Silas, her hand pressed against her belly. "What is she talking about?" Sheriff Garrett dismounted as well, holding up his hand in a placating gesture. "Miss Henley, Mrs. Henley, Mr. McKenna, let's all stay calm and discuss this reasonable-like." "There's nothing to discuss," Judith said. "I signed a bill of sale transferring temporary custody of Clara to Mr. McKenna in exchange for livestock. The term was 6 months. It's been less than 2. The contract is still valid." "You can't sell a person," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I'm not property. You're my daughter, under my care until you're married or turn 21. I have the legal right to place you in service." Judith's face was hard. "And I have the legal right to recall you. Why?" Clara asked. "Why now?" For the first time, Judith's composure cracked slightly. "The boarding house failed. I've lost it. I need you to work, to help me earn money. There's a family in Silver Creek willing to take you on as a housekeeper. They'll overlook your condition if the price is right. You want to sell me again." Clara felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. "That's what this is. Another transaction." "I want to survive," Judith snapped. "Something you've never had to worry about because there was always someone else to carry the burden. Your father, me, now Mr. McKenna." She turned to Silas. "I'm willing to reimburse you for the cow. Give you something for your trouble. But Clara comes with me." "No," Silas said again, his voice like stone. "She stays here." Sheriff Garrett pulled out the paper Judith had given him and unfolded it slowly. "I'm afraid the law is on Mrs. Henley's side here, Silas. This document, it's crude, but it's legally binding. Clara was placed in your service for a specific term. That term hasn't expired." Clara looked at the paper the sheriff was holding. She could see writing on it, could see 2 signatures at the bottom. One was her mother's. The other must be Silas's. "You signed that?" she asked Silas. "You agreed to temporary custody?" "I signed what she put in front of me," Silas said. "Didn't read it close. Was focused on getting you away from that town. So you knew this might happen." "No, I thought—" He stopped, his jaw tight. "I thought a deal was a deal. Thought your mother had enough decency not to come back." "Decency doesn't pay debts," Judith said. "Decency doesn't keep a roof over your head. I did what I had to do then, and I'm doing what I have to do now." Clara felt the world tilting. She'd been starting to believe she was safe, starting to believe she'd found a place where she could raise her child without fear. And now her mother was here to take it all away, to sell her to someone else, to start the whole nightmare over again. "I won't go," Clara said. She stood straighter. Despite the weight of her belly, despite her fear. "I won't go with you. I'm staying here. You don't have a choice," Judith said. "Everyone has a choice." Clara's voice grew stronger. "You taught me that when you traded me for a cow. You made your choice then. I'm making mine now." "Sheriff," Judith said, turning to Garrett, "are you going to enforce the law or not?" The sheriff looked miserable. "Miss Hemley, I don't want to force you, but the law is clear. Until you're married or of age, your mother has legal authority. Then I'll marry her." The words came from Silas, clear and definite. "Right now, today, that settles the legal question." Everyone turned to stare at him. "You can't be serious," Judith said. "I'm entirely serious." Silas looked at Clara. "If you're willing, it would keep you safe. Keep the baby safe. It's just paperwork, just legal protection. But it would work." Clara's mind was racing. Marriage to Silas. She'd thought about it in abstract terms, in the quiet moments when she let herself imagine a future. But this was different. This was practical, legal, a shield against her mother's manipulation. "You'd do that?" she asked. "Marry me just to keep me from being taken away? I'd do that." Silas's eyes held hers. "Question is whether you want it." Clara looked at her mother, saw the calculation in her face, the cold determination. Looked at the sheriff, uncomfortable but bound by law. Looked at the clearing, the cabin, the life she'd been building here. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." "This is ridiculous," Judith said. "A marriage of convenience? No one will recognize it." "The law will recognize it," Sheriff Garrett said slowly. "If they're properly married, Mrs. Henley, you lose all legal claim. Clara would be under her husband's protection." Protection. Judith laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? He bought her for a cow, and now he's keeping her by marrying her. How is that any better?" "It's better because I choose it," Clara said. "That's the difference you'll never understand. Choice." Silas stepped closer to the sheriff. "How do we make this legal?" "Right here, right now?" Garrett scratched his head. "Well, technically, I'm not authorized to perform marriages. You'd need a preacher or a judge. But I can witness a declaration. If you both state your intent to marry in front of witnesses and sign a document, that creates a common law marriage. It'd hold up in most courts. Then let's do it," Silas said. "Wait." Clara held up her hand. She walked slowly toward her mother, stopping a few feet away. "Why did you really come back?" The truth this time. Judith's face worked through several emotions before settling on something closer to defeat than anger. "I told you. The boarding house failed. There's more. Tell me. I have nothing left." Judith's voice cracked. "No house. No money. No prospects. I thought if I could get you back, if I could place you somewhere that paid well enough, maybe I could survive. Maybe I wouldn't end up." She stopped. "End up like me?" Clara finished. "Desperate and alone?" "Yes." Judith looked away. "I know you think I'm cruel. Maybe I am, but I'm also frightened. And I don't know what else to do." For a moment, Clara felt something almost like pity. Her mother had lost everything: husband, home, dignity. She was scrambling for survival the only way she knew how. But that didn't make what she'd done right. Didn't make it forgivable. "I can't help you," Clara said quietly. "Not anymore. You made your choice when you traded me away. You chose survival over love. I understand it, but I can't forgive it. And I can't let you keep making choices for me." She turned back to Silas. "I'm ready. Let's do this." Sheriff Garrett pulled out a small notebook and pencil. "All right, then. I'll write up a declaration. You'll both need to sign it, and I'll witness it along with." He looked at Judith. "Will you witness?" "No," Judith said flatly. "I'll find my own witness," Silas said. He called out toward the barn. "Mrs. Chun, if you're there, I could use your help." An older Chinese woman emerged from the barn, where she'd apparently been tending to one of the horses. She was small, but carried herself with quiet authority. "I heard raised voices," she said. "Thought it best to stay out of the way until needed." "I need you to witness a marriage," Silas said. Mrs. Chun looked at Clara, at Silas, at the tense scene in the clearing. Then she smiled. "It would be my honor." The declaration was simple. Clara Henley and Silas McKenna stated their intention to marry, to create a legal and binding union. They signed their names. Sheriff Garrett witnessed it. Mrs. Chun witnessed it. And just like that, Clara became Clara McKenna. Judith mounted her horse without another word. The sheriff helped her, then mounted his own horse. "I'm sorry it came to this," Garrett said. "But the law is satisfied. Mrs. McKenna is no longer under her mother's authority." They rode away, and Clara watched them go with her hand in Silas's hand, and her new name still strange on her tongue. When they were gone, she turned to Silas. "What do we do now?" "Same thing we were doing before," he said. "We survive. We build a life. We make it work. Are we really married?" "Legally, yes. In every other way." He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll figure it out as we go." Clara looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "Thank you. Saving me. Again." "You saved yourself," Silas said. "I just stood beside you while you did it." Mrs. Chun approached them, smiling. "Congratulations on your marriage. I brought herbs for when the baby comes. Thought it might be soon, so I rode up to check on you." "Good timing, yes?" "Very good timing," Clara agreed as they walked back to the cabin together. Clara felt the baby kick hard, as if celebrating. She pressed her hand to her belly and thought about her mother riding away, about the choices that had led her here, about the strange and unexpected way her life was unfolding. She was married now. She had a home. She had someone who would stand beside her instead of selling her away. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was young and naive, and believed in easy love and simple happiness, but it was hers, and that made it worth everything. Mrs. Chun stayed at the cabin that night, preparing for what she said was imminent. "Baby will come soon," she said, examining Clara with gentle, practiced hands. "Maybe 2 days, maybe 3. But soon, Clara felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. She'd known this moment was coming since the day she'd first felt the baby move inside her. But knowing something and being ready for it were different things entirely. "I don't know what to do," Clara admitted as Mrs. Chun unpacked her leather remedy kit. The case was old, but well-maintained, filled with dried herbs, clean cloths, and mysterious implements Clara didn't recognize. "You do what women have always done," Mrs. Chun said. "You endure. You push when I tell you to push. You breathe when I tell you to breathe. And you remember that your body knows this work, even if your mind doesn't." "Were you frightened when you had your children?" Mrs. Chun's hands paused briefly in their work. "I had 3 children. Lost 2 to sickness. 1 survived." Her voice carried old grief, the kind that had been worn smooth by time. "Was I frightened?" "Yes, every time. But fear doesn't stop babies from coming. So we face it." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the cabin settling around her. Silas was in the main room. She could hear him moving occasionally, stoking the fire, making quiet preparations. Mrs. Chun had taken the other bed in Silas's room, giving Clara privacy for what might be her last night of peace before everything changed. She thought about the day's events, about her mother's desperate face, about becoming Clara McKenna instead of Clara Henley, about the way Silas had stood beside her without hesitation, offering marriage not as a trap but as protection. They hadn't talked about what the marriage meant, whether it was just paperwork or something more, whether they were partners or still just 2 people circumstantially thrown together. But Clara knew what she wanted. She'd known it for weeks, maybe longer. She just hadn't had the courage to name it. She loved him, not the wild, foolish love she'd felt for Thomas. This was different, deeper, built on respect and trust, and the kind of care that showed itself in small, daily actions. In cradles built by firelight, in blankets passed from one woman's memory to another woman's hope, in standing firm when someone tried to take away what was precious. Clara pressed her hand to her belly and whispered into the darkness, "Your father is a good man, better than he knows. I hope you understand that someday. I hope you're grateful for what he's willing to give us." The baby kicked in response, and Clara smiled despite her fear. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise. Clara woke to the smell of Mrs. Chun's herbal tea and the sound of Silas outside chopping wood. She rose carefully and went to the window. Frost covered everything, making the world look new and clean. Mrs. Chun brought her tea and bread. "Eat," she said. "You'll need your strength. How do you know? That the baby will come soon? The baby has dropped lower. Your body is preparing." But also, Mrs. Chun smiled. "I've been doing this 40 years. I know." They spent the day in quiet preparation. Mrs. Chun boiled water and laid out clean linens. She arranged her herbs and remedies on the table with careful precision. She showed Clara breathing techniques and positions that might help during labor. Silas mostly stayed outside, giving them space, but Clara could see him through the window. He was restless, chopping more wood than they'd need, checking on the animals repeatedly, finding work to do that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. In the afternoon, Clara called him inside. "I need to say something," she said, before everything changes." Silas set down the axe he'd been sharpening and came to sit across from her at the table. Mrs. Chun tactfully retreated to the other room. "What is it?" Clara took a breath. "This morning, we got married. Sort of. Legally, anyway. But we never talked about what that means. What you expect." She stopped. Tried again. "I need you to know that I don't expect anything from you. This marriage was practical, necessary. If you want to keep living like we have been, just sharing space and nothing more, I understand. Is that what you want?" Silas asked. "No." Clara met his eyes. "But what I want doesn't matter if you don't want the same thing." "What do you want, Clara?" She'd never been good at bold declarations. Thomas had done all the talking in their relationship, all the promising, all the sweet words that turned out to be empty. But Thomas had taught her something valuable, even if he hadn't meant to. He taught her that words without action meant nothing. Silas had never said he loved her, had never made grand promises or spoken pretty poetry, but he'd built her a cradle. He'd given her his wife's blanket. He'd married her to keep her safe. He'd shown her what love looked like when it was real. "I want this to be a real marriage," Clara said. "I want us to be partners. I want to build a life together, not just survive alongside each other. I want," her voice caught, "I want you to know that I love you. I think maybe you love me too, even if you haven't said it." Silas was quiet for a long moment. His weathered hands rested on the table between them, and Clara watched as he flexed his fingers, as if testing whether they still worked. When Sarah died, he finally said, "I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd loved once, lost everything, and that was all I got. Didn't think I deserved more. Didn't think I wanted more." He looked up at her. "Then you came here, broken and scared and carrying a baby that wasn't mine. And I thought I was just helping someone who needed help. Doing the right thing, but," Clara prompted softly, "but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about doing the right thing. Started being about wanting you here, wanting to hear you moving around in the morning, wanting to talk to you over supper, wanting." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Wanting this. A life. With you. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. I love you. And yes, I want this to be a real marriage. And yes, I want to raise this baby as ours." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not a man who says pretty things, Clara. But I'm a man who keeps his promises. And I'm promising you now, whatever comes, we'll face it together." Clara felt tears on her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. "That's the prettiest thing anyone's ever said to me." They sat like that for a while, holding hands across the table, letting the weight of their words settle. Mrs. Chun eventually emerged from the other room, took one look at them, and smiled. "Good," she said. "Baby should come into a house full of love. Makes everything easier." As if summoned by Mrs. Chun's words, Clara felt the first contraction. It wasn't painful yet, just a tightening across her belly that made her catch her breath. She pressed her hand to the place and felt her body beginning the work it was built to do. "It's starting," she said. Mrs. Chun moved into action immediately. "How strong? How long?" "Not strong. Maybe 10 seconds? Good. We have time." Mrs. Chun began organizing her supplies. "First babies take a while. This will be long work, but we'll get through it." Silas stood, looking uncertain. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep the fire going," Mrs. Chun instructed. "Make sure we have plenty of hot water. And stay close. She needs you." The afternoon passed slowly. The contractions came irregularly, at first 10 minutes apart, then 8, then 15 again. Clara walked around the cabin, ate small amounts when Mrs. Chun told her to, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Silas stayed near, his presence steady. He didn't hover or fuss, but whenever Clara looked up, he was there, splitting wood within sight of the window, bringing in water, checking the fire. Always there. As evening approached, the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Clara had to stop and breathe through them now, her hand gripping whatever was nearest. Sometimes it was the back of a chair, sometimes it was Silas's arm. He never pulled away, never showed discomfort at her grip. "You're doing well," Mrs. Chun said, checking Clara again. "Baby is in good position. Strong heartbeat. Everything is as should be." But as night fell, Clara's courage began to falter. The pain was building, relentless and consuming. She thought she understood what labor would be like, had heard other women talk about it. But hearing about pain and experiencing it were entirely different things. "I'm scared," she admitted during a break between contractions. "What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this?" "You're already doing it," Mrs. Chun said firmly. "Your body knows the way. Trust it." Silas knelt beside the bed where Clara was resting. He took her hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived everything the town threw at you. You survived being traded away like you didn't matter. You survived learning that your mother valued a cow more than her own daughter. And you're still here, still fighting, still choosing life." He brushed damp hair back from her forehead. "If you can survive all that, you can survive this. Will you stay? When it gets worse, even if it's—" Clara didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Even if it's messy, even if I scream, even if I'm not brave. I'll stay," Silas promised. "Right here. However long it takes." Another contraction hit, stronger than the others. Clara squeezed Silas's hand so hard she thought she might break bones, but he didn't pull away. He stayed exactly where he'd promised to stay. When the contraction passed, Mrs. Chun said, "It's time to move to the birthing position. Baby is coming faster now." Clara looked at Silas, at his weathered face and steady eyes, looked at Mrs. Chun, at her capable hands and calm certainty, looked at the cradle Silas had built, waiting by the fireplace with Sarah's blanket folded inside. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the shame and the judgment, the mother who'd traded her away, the man who'd seen her worth when no one else would, the love that had grown in unlikely soil between two broken people learning to be whole again. "I'm ready," Clara said, and she was. Mrs. Chun finished her work and stepped back to wash her hands. "She want to nurse soon. Let her find her way. Babies know what to do." Clara helped the baby find what she needed, marveling at the instinct that guided such a tiny creature. The baby latched on, and Clara felt a rush of emotion so powerful it nearly undid her. This was her daughter. This was her family. This was real Dot after a while. Mrs. Chun took the baby to clean her properly and check her over thoroughly. Silas stayed close, watching every movement with the intensity of a man who'd lost children before and wouldn't risk losing another. "She's healthy," Mrs. Chun pronounced. "Good weight, strong lungs, all fingers and toes present." She wrapped the baby in Sarah's blue blanket, the one that had waited all this time for a new child to warm. "What will you name her?" Clara and Silas looked at each other. They discussed this before, in the abstract, but now the moment was real. "Hope," Clara said. "Her name is Hope." Silas's face softened. "Hope McKenna." "Yes," Clara said firmly. "Hope McKenna." Mrs. Chun brought the wrapped bundle to Silas. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Silas's hands trembled slightly as he took Hope into his arms. He held her with the awkward care of someone who'd done this before, but not in a long time. The baby was so small in his weathered hands, so fragile and precious. "Hello, Hope," he said quietly. "Welcome to the family." Clara watched them together, the grizzled mountain man and the newborn baby wrapped in his dead wife's blanket, and understood fully what Silas had given her. Not just shelter or protection or even love. He'd given her the chance to build something new while honoring what came before. He'd given her a family. "May I?" Silas asked, gesturing to the locket around Clara's neck. She nodded, and he opened it carefully with one hand while holding Hope with the other. From his pocket, he produced a small pair of scissors Mrs. Chun had sterilized earlier. With gentle precision, he snipped a tiny lock of Hope's dark hair and placed it in the empty side of the locket. "There," he said, closing it. "Past and present together." Clara pressed her hand to the locket, feeling the warmth of it. Sarah's hair and Hope's hair side by side. Loss and new life, grief and joy. The way families carried both and survived. Mrs. Chun smiled at them. "I'll stay another day or two. Make sure mother and baby are both recovering well. Then you'll be on your own." "Thank you," Clara said. "For everything." "No need for thanks. This is what we do, help each other through the hard moments." Mrs. Chun began gathering her supplies. "Now both of you should rest. The work is done, but the real work is just beginning." Silas brought Hope back to Clara, placing her in the cradle he'd built. The baby settled into it as if she'd been waiting for it all along, her tiny face peaceful now that the trauma of birth was behind her. Clara watched her daughter sleep, still hardly able to believe she was real. "She's beautiful," Silas said, standing beside Clara. "Looks like you." "She looks like herself," Clara said. "Like Hope." They stood together watching the baby breathe, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, watching the miracle of new life continuing. Outside, dawn was breaking. Clara had labored through the entire night, and now the sun was rising on the first day of Hope's life. "I need to tell you something," Silas said quietly. "When I agreed to your mother's arrangement, when I signed that paper, I didn't know it would lead to this. Didn't know I'd fall in love with you. Didn't know we'd have a daughter together, even if she's not mine by blood." "She is yours," Clara interrupted. "Blood doesn't make a father. Being there makes a father. And you're here." "I am here," Silas agreed. "And I'm promising you now, Clara, I'll be here for all of it. The sleepless nights and the first words and the scraped knees and everything else. I'm not the man who left you. I'm not the mother who traded you away. I'm the man who's choosing to stay, every single day, for as long as you'll have me." Clara reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "That sounds like wedding vows." "Maybe it is. The vows we didn't get to say when the sheriff was standing in our clearing. The vows that matter more than paperwork." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Clara McKenna. And I love our daughter. And I'm grateful every day that your mother made that terrible choice because it brought you here to me. I love you too, Clara said. And I'm grateful too, even though I never thought I'd be. But this, she gestured at the cabin, at the cradle, at Hope sleeping peacefully. This is worth everything it took to get here. They stayed like that as the sun rose higher, watching their daughters sleep in the cradle Silas had built, wrapped in the blanket Sarah had woven, wearing a name that meant exactly what they'd found together. Hope. The sun streamed through the window, warming the cabin, and Clara thought about how far she'd come. From the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, where she'd been mocked and scorned. From the boarding house, where her mother had valued a cow more than her own daughter. From the terrifying journey up the mountain with a stranger she didn't trust. To this. To a man who loved her. To a daughter she'd fought to bring into the world. To a home that was truly hers. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was young and naive. It was better, because it was built on truth instead of pretty lies, on respect instead of empty promises, on the kind of love that showed itself in actions rather than words. Hope stirred in her cradle, making the small sounds newborns make. Clara reached down and touched her daughter's cheek, feeling the softness of new skin, the warmth of new life. "Welcome home," she whispered. "Welcome home, little one." 2 months passed like a dream. Hope grew stronger each day, her cries lusty and demanding, her eyes beginning to focus on the faces that hovered over her cradle. Clara recovered slowly, her body healing, her confidence as a mother building with each feeding, each diaper change, each moment of successfully soothing her daughter's cries. Silas was a constant presence, patient and helpful in ways that surprised Clara. He could calm Hope when Clara was exhausted, could change a diaper as efficiently as he could skin a deer, could walk the cabin floor in the middle of the night singing old songs in his rough voice until the baby fell back asleep. They were a family, not because of paperwork or circumstances, but because they'd chosen to be. On a crisp autumn morning, with the first snow beginning to dust the mountain peaks, Silas came in from his morning chores and said, "I think it's time we went to town." Clara looked up from nursing Hope. "Why?" "To make it official. The marriage. We did it quick, in front of the sheriff, but I want it done proper. In the church, with you in a nice dress, with people as witnesses." He paused. "I want everyone in Redemption Creek to see that you're my wife, that Hope is my daughter, that we're a family that can't be broken." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "You don't have to do that. I want to." They made the journey a week later. Clara wore a simple dress Silas had bought her, cream-colored with blue embroidery. Hope was wrapped in Sarah's blanket, alert and looking around at this new world beyond the cabin. Silas rode proud and straight, his family before him on the saddle. The church in Redemption Creek was small, with a steeple that reached toward the sky like a prayer. The preacher, a man named Reverend Thomas, had agreed to perform the ceremony. Mrs. Chung was there, as was the blacksmith and his kind wife who'd always treated Clara decently. But there were others too, people from town who'd come out of curiosity or judgment or perhaps, in some cases, genuine goodwill. Clara saw Martha Hendricks in the back pew, the woman who'd pulled her daughter away from Clara months ago. She saw Mr. Patterson from the general store. She saw faces that had looked at her with contempt. She held her head high. Silas had commissioned a ring from the blacksmith, a simple gold band forged from nuggets he'd panned from the creek behind his cabin. It was beautiful in its simplicity, honest and real, like everything about Silas. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They spoke their vows in clear voices, and this time Clara meant every word with her whole heart. When Silas placed the ring on her finger, his hands were steady. When he kissed her to seal their marriage, it was gentle and full of promise. They walked out of the church as husband and wife, legally and spiritually bound, with Hope in Clara's arms making small cooing sounds that echoed in the quiet space. Outside, some people congratulated them. Others just watched. Clara didn't care anymore what they thought. She'd learned that the opinions of people who didn't love her didn't matter. Only the opinions of people who actually knew her, who'd seen her at her worst and chosen to stand beside her anyway. Those were the opinions worth valuing. They stopped at the general store for supplies. Mr. Patterson greeted them respectfully, called Clara Mrs. McKenna, asked after the baby with what seemed like genuine interest. Clara responded politely but didn't linger. She had no need to prove anything to him or anyone else in this town. As they were leaving, a young woman approached them. She was pregnant, maybe 5 months along, and her eyes were red-rimmed and frightened. Clara recognized her, one of the seamstress's daughters, barely 18. "Mrs. McKenna," the girl said hesitantly. "I heard people say you." She stopped, gathered courage. "They say you survived, that you made a good life even though I was ruined?" Clara finished gently. "Even though I was shamed and mocked and treated like I was worth less than nothing." The girl nodded, tears spilling over. Clara shifted hope to one arm and reached out to touch the girl's shoulder. "Listen to me. What people say about you doesn't define you. What matters is what you know about yourself. You're not ruined. You're not worthless. You're a woman who made a choice, or had a choice made for you, and now you're facing the consequences. That takes courage, but everyone will judge. Let them. Their judgment says more about them than it does about you." Clara squeezed the girl's shoulder. "Find people who see your worth. Build a life with them. And don't ever let anyone convince you that you're less than human because you made a mistake." The girl wiped her eyes. "Thank you." Clara watched her walk away, and Silas said quietly, "You just gave her hope." "Someone gave it to me," Clara said, looking at him. "I'm just passing it along." They rode back up the mountain as the afternoon sun slanted through the trees. Hope slept peacefully against Clara's chest, and Silas's arms were warm around them both. When they crested the ridge and saw the cabin in its clearing, Clara felt something settle deep in her chest. Home. Not the place she'd been born or the place she'd been raised, but the place she'd chosen. The place that had chosen her back. That evening, they sat by the fire after putting Hope to bed in her cradle. Silas held Clara's hand, turning the gold ring on her finger, feeling the weight of it. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "about what your life would have been if things had gone different?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "But then I look at Hope. I look at you. I look at this life we've built. And I realize that if things had gone different, I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have us. No regrets then? No regrets." Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling his strength, his steadiness. "We're not defined by how we start, Silas. We're defined by how we choose to continue. And I choose this. Every single day, I choose this." Through the window, the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The mountain wind sang its ancient song through the pines. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled and Hope breathed softly in her sleep. Clara McKenna sat with her husband in the home. They built together and felt the weight of the silver locket around her neck. Past and present, grief and joy, loss and love, all of it woven together into something stronger than any single strand. She'd been traded for a cow by a mother who couldn't see her worth. She'd been mocked and shamed by a town that valued reputation over compassion. She'd been broken down until she thought there was nothing left to break. But she'd survived. She'd found strength she didn't know she had. She'd discovered that love wasn't always loud or dramatic or easy to recognize. Sometimes love looked like a quiet man building a cradle by firelight. Sometimes it looked like patience and respect and the choice to stand beside someone when everyone else walked away. This was her story. Not the story of a woman who was ruined, but the story of a woman who found redemption, not because someone saved her, but because she saved herself with the help of someone who believed she was worth saving. And that, Clara thought, as she watched the fire and felt Silas's heartbeat steady against her side, That was worth everything. The end.